Welcome back. Canadian police have been clearing protesters blocking the crossing between Detroit and Windsor, Canada. The city getting a court order yesterday for their removal. For days, truckers and others have been disrupting the crossing, demanding an end to Canada's vaccine mandate and calling for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down. It has slowed the flow of goods between the two countries at the busiest border crossing in North America. The auto industry on both sides of the border had to roll back production. At least 5 automakers, Ford, GM, Honda, Toyota, and Chrysler's parent company experiencing production disruptions at their U.S. or Canada plants because of the demonstrations. Joining us now to discuss how these bumper-to-bumper demonstrations are impacting businesses in Canada is David Soberman. He is a professor of marketing at the University of Toronto. Professor, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So what is the impact of businesses on Canada? I was there all week. I talked to one local restaurant. He said that he lost 85% of his business, but this is much broader than that.
Yes, well, certainly local restaurants and retailers are suffering, but the big problem with the Ambassador Bridge is that hundreds of millions of dollars of trade go back and forth across that bridge every day. And when the bridge is blocked, the trade doesn't happen. So it's devastating for companies on both sides of the border.
Yeah, and we've already seen the effect it's having, as you mentioned, on the auto industry, on the supply chain. And this is also impacting the U.S. A lot of people, including myself, didn't even realize that the bridge from Detroit to Windsor is the busiest border crossing in North America. What effects is it having on the U.S. economy? Because we are very important trade partners.
Well, for sure, our economies are incredibly integrated. And even though the US economy is much bigger than the Canadian economy, Canada and the US are the world's 2 biggest trading partners. And largely that is because of the free trade agreement. Parts of vehicles, parts of products are made on one side of the border and packaged on the other side, or assembled on one side and the parts are made on the other side, and so on. And so when there's a blockage at the border, it doesn't just stop the factory that's supplying raw materials, it also stops the factory that's actually manufacturing finished products as well.
And I was there in Ottawa. I was talking to local businesses. A lot of them were devastated because no one could get to them, including the workers. Others, though, actually welcomed the protesters. They said that they sympathized with the cause after these vaccine mandates kind of forced shutdowns or drove out businesses. So you're a Canadian. You live in Canada, not in the center of the protest. So just tell me the mood in Canada. What is the reaction like?
Well, I think obviously a majority of Canadians are not in support, certainly of the bridge being closed. I think many of us do empathize with the protesters and the fact that people are very frustrated with the pandemic and frustrated with the restrictions that we've had. And I mean, in our country, we have the freedom to protest, the freedom to assemble, and freedom of speech. On the other hand, when it gets to the point of blocking major roads and stopping businesses from operating, and even now to the point of interfering with international trade, most Canadians probably aren't on board with that. But the issue is that when you have several hundred protesters with large trucks, you're able to create a lot of havoc at a border crossing like the Ambassador Bridge.
Of course, and trade between the U.S. and Canada, usually not top of mind, usually taken for granted. What kinds of goods are we talking about? We know about the auto industry. What else?
Well, certainly there's going to be a lot of food that is being imported by Canada this time of year from the U.S. because we have a very cold climate. And conversely, there's many raw materials, such as paper and so on, that is actually manufactured in Canada and shipped down to the US in order to be turned into finished products. Our economies are very integrated, and so it's hard to sort of tabulate all the different ways that this is hurting our economies, but it's devastating for the Canadian economy, but it's also being felt in the US.
And there have been a lot of numbers thrown out there. Can you put a dollar amount on how much was lost every day that bridge was blocked?
Well, as I said before, I've heard numbers like $300 or $400 million worth of goods goes back and forth across that bridge. Now, does that mean that that's completely stopped? No. The reason is that there's other ways for trucks to actually get into Canada. They can go up to Niagara or go to Sarnia, which is in the other direction. But this creates huge delays And obviously, there's an issue of capacity. So some companies are able to keep running. Others actually have to slow down or stop altogether. Now, it's been going on for about 5 days. And it looks like maybe the bridge is starting to clear up. In that particular case, there'll be an effect, but it won't be major. But if this continues weeks on end, it's going to be really bad for Ontario.
And the irony, right, is that this is hurting other truckers and blue collar workers who are working in those factories on both sides of the border. 90% of truckers in Canada are, in fact, fully vaccinated. The requirements are the same to get into Canada as they are to get into the U.S.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost ironic because, many truckers are as frustrated by this as the general public is. The reason is that they want to be able to deliver their goods. They want to be able to make the routes that they have from their employers in order to pick things up in one place and bring them to another. And they're not able to do that. So, of course, for them, it represents not just a loss of employment, but also frustration. So I think, for Canadians right now, this is a pretty tough time. And I think it's also tough, certainly for the Americans that are living on the other side of the border, because many Americans and Canadians cross that border every day. In fact, we have quite a number of healthcare workers that go across and work in Detroit. And it's very difficult for them to do that with the sort of blockages that we've seen.
Well, this has been a dramatic and harrowing story, and we will continue to watch it, of course, and see how it unfolds. We appreciate you putting it into perspective for us. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, and good evening.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.